I'll say good evening to you, and again, welcome. You know, this is one of our programs for Black History Month, as well as part of our forum program as well. And so we're just really pleased that you could join us this evening. We know how cold it is outside. And, you know, Willie Brown came from San Francisco, so you can understand how he's feeling. I would say to you that Black History Month started off as Black History Week. Americans have recognized Black history annually since 1926, first as Negro History Week and later as Black History Month. What you might not know is that Black history had barely begun to be studied or even documented when the tradition originated. Although blacks have been in America at least as far back as colonial times, it was not until the 20th century that they gained a respectable presence in the history books. Black History Month is celebrated annually in the United States and Canada in February and in the United Kingdom in October. Dr. Carter G. Woodson really was the person who started Black History Month. And Woodson chose the second week of February for Black History Week because it marks the birthdays of two men who greatly influenced the Black American population, Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. However, February has much more than Douglass and Lincoln to show for its significance in Black American history. For example, on February 23rd, 1868, W.E. Du Bois, important civil rights leader and co-founder of the NAACP, was born. On February 3rd, 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed, granting blacks the right to vote. February 25th, 1870, the first black United States Senator, Hiram R. Revels, 1822 and 1901, took his oath of office. And in February the 12th, 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, was founded by a group of concerned black and white citizens in New York. So as you can see, it had a history of how it actually originated. There are many people would say to you that black history is American history, and it should not be dealt with separately. This evening we have the honor, and I'm so glad you're here to listen to Willie Brown. Willie Brown grew up in a racially segregated small town of Mineola, Texas. And for young Willie Brown, the only hope of rising in the world was to leave East Texas for San Francisco, where his uncle lived. After high school, he enrolled in San Francisco State, where he became active in his church and in the San Francisco chapter of the NAACP. Brown worked his way through college as a doorman, a janitor, and as shoe salesman. After earning a degree in political science, Brown went on to Hastings Law College, where he was elected president of his class. At a time when few black attorneys practiced in San Francisco, Brown made a name for himself by taking on cases other attorneys dismissed as hopeless. After losing the Democratic primary in his first bid for the state assembly in 1962, he regrouped and he won in 1964. When Brown entered the 80-member California Assembly, he was one of only 4 African-American members. As some of you know, we have 7 in the Kansas House of Representatives today. Throughout the 60s and 70s, Brown played an increasingly important role in the California Democratic Party. He made his first impact on the national stage in 1972, where he electrified delegates at the Democratic National Convention with a fiery speech delivered during credentials fight. He ran for Speaker of the Assembly in 1974. He did not win, but he did not give up. In 1980, he won the Speaker's office with an unexpected coalition of 28 Republicans and only 23 Democrats. When Willie Brown ran for re-election in 1994, and you have to remember, he held his position for 15 years. Unheard of. He's not polarized. He had Republican and Democrat votes. But when he ran in 1994, California's newly elected term limits assured that it would be his last term in the legislature. Republicans won a one-vote majority in the California State Senate that year, threatening Brown's record-setting tenure as Speaker. Brown pulled off a remarkable upset, clinging to his leadership in the Assembly by a margin of a single vote cast by a Republican member whose loyalty Brown won in an earlier session. When he left the California Assembly, I'm sure there were some people thought, term limits, he's out, he's done. Oh no. He ran for mayor of San Francisco. And in 1996, when he was running for mayor of San Francisco, both papers endorsed his opponent, but he had a primary fight, and when it was all said and done, even the two endorsements from the newspapers didn't do it. He won and was swept into office by landslide. Brown began a term as the most popular mayor in city's history and was reelected to a second term. And in fact, when he left office in 2003, it was his chosen successor that was elected. I would say to you that we're talking about a man of determination, persuasion, a real feeling for public service, someone who wants to make a difference in the lives of others, especially a difference that when he grew up in an all-segregated town, people weren't worried about whether or not they made a difference in his life. But he made a difference in the lives of others. So I would say to you in introducing him that it is my pleasure to present Willie Brown to you. And I told him, and I got credit for bringing him here, but I want you to know who really should get the credit. We have a mutual friend named Larry Lucas. And Larry Lucas persuaded Willie Brown to come here. And I will make sure he sees the taping this evening to know that indeed he was on this stage. But it is with pleasure that I thank my friend Larry Lucas for making it possible for a man who's in demand to speak all over the country and in Europe to be with us this evening. And with that, I give to you a true public servant, the Honorable Willie Brown, and I turn the program over to our director, Bill Lacey.
Mr. Mayor, thanks for being at the Dole Institute tonight. We really appreciate it. Barbara told about your growing up in a small town in Texas that was segregated. How did your early life affect your determination and your career in politics and public service?
Well, first you should know I had no perspective at the time that I was growing up in Mineola about politics or about anything beyond just surviving, frankly. And the school that I attended had about 244 students in 12 grades, 2 grades per classroom. There were no labs or anything of that nature. There was outside plumbing, so to speak, use, and no library, no basketball facility, no football facility. It was a very difficult little town. It however, had a clear demarcation line. Black people lived on one side of the town and white people lived on the other, and there was no cross-fertilization at all. Black people did all the menial tasks, and white people gave all the orders. So one could not get a perspective, frankly, on any of the things that I ultimately was able to do. As indicated by Barbara, the only thing that was absolutely for sure is that my family some had gone off to war, some had gone off to work in the industry that supplied the war, and at the shipyards in San Francisco and what have you, and they were certain that there is absolutely no life that anybody black should be required to live in Mineola, and they rescued me.
How did you decide to get involved in politics and public service, and what were your first steps?
Well, when I arrived in California, I actually went off to college in Texas. I went to Prairie View A&M College. That was down near Houston in Hempstead County. And I'd gotten a scholarship as a student from Mineola, and family had no money. And my mother had not yet been persuaded by my uncle that it was okay to send me out to visit with him. She was reluctant because she's a very religious woman, and he had no acquaintanceship with religion. As a matter of fact, he had no acquaintanceship with a job. He just, he was really a guy who understood how to live without working, and she didn't admire that, and she really thought that it would be a terrible thing to be so exposed. So she had me take that scholarship, and I went down to Prairie View A&M, and my mother was very proud of it, and telling everybody her son had gone off to college. Well, you go to school at Prairie View, you go in the summer, you get a scholarship, you go right after you graduate from high school, because Prairie View, much of Prairie View's resources came from the farming component of Prairie View, the food that was raised that the students were going to eat and what have you, and as part of your scholarship, and you understood that it wasn't much of a scholarship when you got to Prairie View, because you were working like hell. And they had family tables. And family tables means 8 students per table. And they put me at a table with 7 football players and me. And I weighed about 120 pounds and et cetera. And by the time the plate got to me, there was nothing in it. Well, I checked the room, and I noticed there were a number of little guys like me being put at tables they shouldn't have been at. So I started organizing them. And then the school didn't want anybody organizing anybody. The way they ran those black schools, you didn't organize anything. So they sent my trunk home. They sent me home. And my mother almost died when she thought I was coming home. And that's what persuaded her to let me go to California. And so that's how I got to California. When I got to California...
that was your first experience in political organizing, too, to a certain extent.
Well, not exactly, because I was raised by my grandmother. My mother went off to Dallas every week to work. She lived up over a garage in Dallas, in Highland Park, and she was a maid and a cook for the family, and she was the only, because I had no father, so she was the only wage earner, so to speak. My grandmother, who had a very bad heart, but raised the children at home in Mineola, and my experience of organizing my grandmother. My grandmother was a tyrant. She really had no sense of democracy about herself at all. You had no right to speak. You had no right to do anything. And I was constantly peppering her with challenges. And so I'd been, into the advocacy role for a long time before I got to California. And when I got to California and became part of San Francisco State was the hotbed of political activities among students in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, in the Bay Area, it was a college that had very few people who lived on campus. Almost nobody lived on campus. It was a college that had mostly returning veterans, many returning veterans, who had these GI benefits, and they got the books. I remember I used to encourage the veterans to go take full advantage of all the things that were made available to them, because I'd then sell their books at half price, since they didn't need them anyway. They were not. So it was fun, frankly, helping to organize in that sense, and it was just a natural segue to go become a young Democrat, the NAACP, the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. I was in everything you could think of that had nothing to do with education, but it had to do with preparing you for life. And I was very active in all those things, and so it was very easy to make the transition through all of that process into politics after graduating from law school.
Okay. I'm going to pause here to ask everybody after tonight to either go home and Google the mayor to learn more about his career, or better yet, pick up his book, which was published in 2008, because we have so little time to cover all of your achievements and everything. So I'll be kind of skipping around pretty quickly, but I want to move forward then to kind of your your activism in San Francisco. You joined the civil rights movement there. You were an attorney there. And like Barbara said, you made your decision in 1962 to run for the Assembly for the first time. What was that like?
Well, it's very easy. I didn't really have much of a choice. There was a fellow named Phil Burton who was kind of the guru of politics in San Francisco. He had figured out early on how you needed to organize the Asians, you needed to organize the blacks, you needed to organize the old people, you needed to organize the decent people in labor, not the ones that were running discriminatory hiring halls and things of that nature, and that if you could put those people together, you really could end up controlling the political process in San Francisco and in California. He had gotten himself elected to the state assembly. He ran for the state assembly against an incumbent Democrat, and that Democrat died in the primary, and Phil lost to a dead man. But he never quit. He came back the next time, and he beat a live guy. So it was quite traumatic. And Phil made choices. Phil's brother was a fellow named John Burton, who became President Pro Tem of the Senate. He became a congressman. We met each other in ROTC. I figured out the first day I got to school that you literally had to avoid the draft. And the way you avoid the draft is become a member of the ROTC. So I became a member of the ROTC in the drill team, and they put us initially not by skill, but in alphabetical order. So it was Brown, Burton, and that's how we met each other, and we became fast friends almost instantly. He introduced me to his brother Phil. This was 1951. He introduced me to his brother Phil, and Phil immediately tagged me as the black component of this coalition he was trying to put together. And so in 1962, having already been elected to the county committee in San Francisco County, I became the designated hitman for that particular district by Phil Burton, and that's how it started.
Okay. And then you ran successfully in...
I lost the first time by 1,000 votes to a 20-year incumbent, a fellow named Ed Gaffney, a painter, and not an artistic painter, but a house painter, which was really humiliating. There's no way a lawyer as groovy as I thought I was ought to be losing to a guy who pushes a brush for a living. But I understood, because we didn't have any money. We had nothing going. Phil had done all the things you do to get elected, except how to reach the voters, and that's a matter of money. You really got to have a little bit of money to reach voters, and we had not yet put that part of our deal together. But in the process, I literally went door to door. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to go the entire district door to door. I went to the extent that I could, and I knew on the night that I lost by 1,000 votes, if I'd been able to switch 500 votes, I would have beaten a 20-year incumbent. The next day, I was back on the streets, shaking hands, saying, "Thank you for your vote." Now, the lying bastards, most of them didn't vote for me. They voted for him. But nevertheless, they said they did. "Oh yeah, Mr. Brown." But 2 years later, in the primary, I beat him by 4,000 votes. So all those people whose hands I shook that had voted for him before switched. And that taught me something right out of the box. The more exposure you have to people who make the choices, the better off you're going to be at being able to persuade them to vote for you.
You had served in the California Assembly for 18 years when I first heard of you. And this is kind of an interesting story. Susie, my wife, who's here and will confirm the validity of this story, by the way, and I were on our honeymoon, and we were passing through San Francisco in very, very early December 1980 when we went down to breakfast one morning, and I picked up the newspaper. I forget which one, and I read this extraordinary story about how you had been elected speaker with a coalition of Republicans and Democrats, and how that a gentleman who became a good friend and a mentor and a boss for me, Ed Rollins, who was the director of the Republican Assembly Caucus, he was a staff director, the two of you had gotten together and concocted this amazing political coalition that elected you speaker. We've heard Ed's version of the story. Let's hear yours.
Well, yeah, it's been a long time. But I tried to win the speakership in June of '74 when Jerry Brown got the nomination the first time for governor of the state of California. He was then Secretary of State, and I was defeated by a fellow San Francisco named Leo McCarthy. And I was defeated by one vote, and that vote was cast by my roommate against me, a fellow named Leon Ralph, whose eulogy I've done appropriately. But he got bought out. He got bought out with an offer of a chairmanship far above his pay grade. I never would have named him to anything near that. He knew it. And as a result, when they walked and offered him the Rules Committee chairmanship, he said, "C'est la vie." And he voted against me, and I lost. Well, I went back to practicing law, etc. And the people who put that little coalition together to defeat me, they were all mercenaries. They were all really awful people. And I knew that they would eventually crash and burn. And sure enough, they did. They mistreated the Republicans. They mistreated each other, etc. And then on an occasion after a huge fundraiser with Ted Kennedy in Los Angeles, the speaker, the man who had benefited from all of their support, gets up and announces that the money he's raised is his and that it's going to go to his efforts to become a U.S. Senator. Well, that really frosted everybody in the room who had been part of the development of his success, and they started talking about how do we get rid of him. They went in and informed him that they were going to dump him. And he, of course, convinced them that they ought to wait a couple of days and they ought to talk about it and to give him a chance to prove to them that he was okay. In the meantime, he took a quick look at the list and figured out who are the guys in exile. I was one of the people in exile. And he called me up and he said, "Hey, listen, these guys are talking about dumping me. And they're the same guys that orchestrated blocking you. I'm now willing to fire any one of them from whatever they have and give it to you if you were with me." I said, done deal. I became the majority leader, and we held the bay. Every day they made a motion to dump him, leading up to the elections of 1980. In the elections of 1980, he won 23 seats. They won 23 seats, and there was one Democrat who wouldn't declare. The Republicans won the remainder of the seats, 33 seats in the House. And Leo McCarthy, who was then the Speaker, was so humiliated and embarrassed, he announced to our membership that we really ought to fold our tent and turn it over to the other guys. And I said, "Of course not, you can't do that. What are you talking about? The House is made up of 80 people. You can't let 24 people determine the fate of this House. It's a 41-vote House, and Republicans have been ignored. That's wrong. They never should have ignored the Republicans." Now, you got to understand, since 1974, I have been wooing Republicans like you wouldn't believe. I made sure that every Republican that I could be of assistance to, I'd been of assistance, et cetera, all anticipating that one of these days there might be an opportunity, not so much for me, but for the House. I knew 80 members ought to be elected the Speaker. And sure enough, at the end of Leo McCarthy's declining to continue to participate, and 3 members of the House came to me and said, one's Maxine Waters, who's in Congress now, one is Elihu Harris, who's the Chancellor of the Community College System in Alameda County, and the other one is Mike Roos. They came to me and said, they were all young members, they didn't totally inexperienced and what have you. They were still in the clouds, and they came and said, "You really ought to be Speaker, and we ought to elect you Speaker." How are you going to do that? Well, your relationship with the Republicans could very well be productive in that regard. I said, no, the Republicans can't necessarily do that. We'd have to do more. Now, what they didn't know is there had already been some conversations with the Republicans on this issue. And sure enough, Ed Rollins and his group put together Carol Hallett, Ross Johnson, and Bob Naylor, and a couple of other Republicans, but with Ed Rollins being the real architect. And we talked about a coalition of Republicans and Democrats electing the Speaker. Not Willie Brown, just a coalition of Republicans and Democrats electing the Speaker. We zeroed in on a guy named Frank Vicentia. Late, he died a few weeks ago too. But Frank Vicentia we zeroed in on because we thought Republicans could stomach Vicentia more than they could Brown. Vicentia was white, he was conservative, he, in every sense of the word, he was not terribly bright, and so he was not a threat to anything, literally. And we thought the Republican right-wingers, and they were becoming right-wingers then, would find it more comfortable to be with him than with me. And that was part of how you develop relationships. You got to be prepared to let somebody else move forward. Frank was in the meeting on one occasion, and he demonstrated so little knowledge of the rules and of the process and what have you, everybody became nervous that the House would run amok if Frank was trying to control it, and that we better look around for somebody else. And they started looking around for somebody else, and of course, Rawlins and the Republicans had already decided they were going to complete what Lincoln started, and I was going to be it, no matter what. They didn't want any other Democrat, because I had also told them that this House needs to be reformed. We need to share resources equally with every member. We need to share leadership roles, chairmanships, etc. We need to share office space, parking space. The Democrats have been horrible. They had treated Republicans like they were Mineola blacks. They really had been nasty to them. They gave them nothing and what have you. And when I start talking about fairness, that resonated very well. And Ed Rawlins and Ross Johnson came up with what the formula of demonstrated fairness could be. And as a result of their efforts, we finally reached an accord. And in that accord, Republicans had to play their hand first, because there were doubting Democrats. The partisan Democrats didn't want to do anything with Republicans. You can't do it with Republicans. You got to do it with Democrats. Well, I was convinced that I was never going to progress if I became subjected to pure, unadulterated Democratic partisanship, because they were in most cases worse than Republicans on the issue of race. And so as a result of that, I said, no way, we're going to do what we think is right. And that's what we did. Fortunately, we had Phil Burton in the Congress, who was very helpful. He kept a congressional delegation from coming down and pounding on Democrats to not do this with Republicans. And the Republicans held a press conference, and they either had all of their votes, 28 votes there, or they had telegrams. And as Republicans, I never even knew. I didn't meet most of those Republicans, many of those Republicans, because they were newly elected. But the end result was the Republicans voted 28 strong. They participated in the nomination process, and 23 Democrats stepped to the plate, and I got elected Speaker December 1, 1980. December 2, 1980, I promptly lined up all the Democrats who had voted against me and advised them that under reapportionment, I'm giving them a congressional district and get them out of the House. And I got them out of the House. I got Berman out of the House. I got the whole crowd. I made their careers. They're in Washington now as a result of having opposed me for Speaker and got the opportunity to move on. And of course, I think some of the Republicans, not Ed, but some of the Republicans were absolutely certain that I was so outrageously flamboyant that I would not be able to sustain the speakership for more than a minute, and that they would get it back. Well, they're still trying to get it back.
I've been involved in politics and studied for 40 years, and that's one of the most amazing stories I've heard in that time.
Well, what's more amazing, though, was in '94, when the Republicans won the majority in the House. The Republicans had one more vote than we had, and it was clear that that's going to be a real challenge. But over the years, in the world of politics, you really do need to befriend people. And I had consistently befriended anybody whom I thought had been mistreated, whether they were Republicans or Democrats. I did it on the floor during the course of a debate. I could be philosophically voting against your bill, but if I thought you were being hammered and pushed around, you'd find no stronger ally. And I was a fairly decent debater. And so if my mic went up, it immediately stopped things and froze things at least a little bit in time. And I made a lot of friends. Sometimes I never had to call upon them for anything. But in my friendship in the world of politics, I always anticipate that one of these days I may have to call upon you for a favor, a la kind of like The Godfather. And that process paid eons of dividends, because when the Republicans won, they had really mistreated a guy. They just so appalled. They had just so mistreated him. I mean, you can't believe what they did to him. They just tried their best to destroy him. And he was originally from Texas, white boy, originally from Texas, a Republican, never should have been a Republican, but he was a Republican, and they had been just nasty to him in every sense of the word, and I'd always been nice to him. And they thought, they just assumed, that he would be voting with them, that Paul Horscher would be voting with them for the speakership. Well, lo and behold, Horscher came to me right after the election and said, listen, I'm not going to vote with those Republicans. I said, you'll never be able to handle the pressure. The White House will call you. Everybody in the world on the Republican side of the aisle will call you and say, you got to vote with, I'm not going to vote with them. I said, okay, do me a favor. Don't tell anybody else that but me. And so he said, well, okay. And I said, on second thought, I've got a friend, a lady friend, Korean lady. She's going home for about a month. She's going back to Korea. Why don't you go with her?
Did he go?
He went with her. No forwarding address, no cell phones. They looked all over. They couldn't find him. They held a celebration. They had a red carpet and all that kind of stuff leading up to the day in which the vote was to be taken, anticipating that all the Republicans would fall in line and lockstep and vote like Republicans sometimes have done. Well, lo and behold, we had Paul Horscher fly back into America on the Sunday night before the Monday, and we had dinner with him in San Francisco, and we drove him up to Sacramento with us at noon on the day of the vote. And when his name was called, he stormed into the chambers and said, Brown. And with that, the place bedlam. The Republicans flipped out, and they really were, at a loss on what to do. And they didn't know but one thing to do, and that was break the quorum. So they split. They left. We don't have a quorum, so we can't do any business. I cut off their pay. And it took them about a month to figure out they couldn't pay their house notes and their car notes, and nothing, unless they came back and made a quorum and accepted the reality that they'd gotten their ass kicked, and they did.
Sounds like you learned a lot from your grandmother, so. You were term limited out of the speakership.
Well, in reality, term limits came about because of me. The Republicans, Ed moved on. Ed moved on, and the good leadership of the Republicans, Carol Hallett got a great job with the Transportation Agency. Some of the other Republicans went off to Congress. And so I was left with now a group of newcomers, all of whom started to dump the Republican leadership. Every Republican leader they dumped, by the way, I immediately made sure he didn't lose any of his staff, he didn't lose his office, he didn't lose his parking space. I had a ball, literally, thwarting everything they attempted to do to their leadership. It really interfered with them. They called FBI investigations, and they ended up going to jail as a result of the investigations because we were not stealing, they were. It was amazing how they went through all of that process. And frankly, it was not good for the House, the way in which it was ultimately done. They sued us on reapportionment. We won on that. They got mad and issued a recall on Rose Bird and the members of the Supreme Court, if you recall. And 3 members of the Supreme Court lost their seat as a result of the Republican challenge because the Supreme Court ruled that the House determines who the Speaker is, and you can't do it the way they were trying to do it. So again, job stayed with Willie. Then the Republicans tried to encourage 5 Democrats, the Gang of 5, to take me out. The Gang of 5 showed up, young, trained Democrats that I'd been nurturing and moving around with, and hanging out with, taking them to the Academy Awards, doing all the things you do to keep your votes kind of in line. Well, these people, these 5 Democrats, were all bad people, ultimately, had bad gene pools. And they were, they really were wrong. And they came in to tell me, hey, we're going to join the Republicans and take you out. But we want you to break the rule, break the longevity table. Honor did it for 7 years and 2 months. In 14 days, you will be 7 years, 2 months, and 1 day. And that's the day we're going to move on you. And just happened to be the day after the primary election. So I said, well, you know, that's not good news, but let's talk about it. So I invited them in my office, and we sat there, and on my way in the door, I turned to my staff girl, and I said, call Lou and tell him. Lou is the chairman of the Rules Committee. Lou hated these guys. He disliked them. He was older, ex-FBI man, and he didn't trust them. And he really didn't trust them. And he'd always been wanting to have the authority to throw them out of their offices, take their parking space, take their chairmanship, fire their staff. And he'd been lobbying me to do that for a long time. I said, call Lou and tell him it's on. And then I went on in, and I kept him in there for about an hour. And then at the end of the hour, I said, how about dinner tonight? Let's keep talking about it. And they said, okay, okay. And they got up to go out. No, you don't go out that door. Go out this door. That's the door to the chambers. That's where all the press was waiting, because Lou had put all their furniture in the hallway and put their cars in the streets. And they knew their chairmanships. The press knew their chairmanships were gone. And the people were led by Gary Condon. You know that name? Mm-hmm. Congressman Gary Condon was their leader. And he and every one of those guys have all had, like, Condon ended up losing his seat because of the chandelier thing. My friend, current friend today, Rusty Reyes, lost his family farm because of some bad decisions on water investments. A guy named Steve Peace, who was a member of the Gang of Five, lost his ability to even get elected because he's the guy that put together the deregulation of power in California. And if you remember, that turned into a disaster, absolute disaster. Jerry Eves got caught taking some money, and he's in jail, still in jail. And Chuck Calderon lost his seat. So every one of them got nailed somehow as a result of it. And that's what my grandmother, my dead grandmother, was doing to those people. And it was just a really terrible scene. When they intended, on the day they intended to move, we were in caucus, and they're about to say they got the votes. Well, they really didn't have the votes, because I had 5 Republican plants as a result of my having helped Republicans whom I knew would never vote with them, but I didn't want to expose them. Lo and behold, on the morning that we are in the caucus discussing whether or not we'd go forward, telephone rings, and the guy comes over and says, you better take this call. So what do you mean take this? I'm busy. I'm presiding. No, you got to take the call. I go to take the call, and it's a woman crying. It's a Republican member's wife crying to tell me that her husband dropped dead this morning. So I hung up the phone. I thanked her very much for the information, told her how sorry I was, how tragic it is that her children no longer has a father, but I hung up the telephone. And so I went back and I listened to the debate, and they said, what was the telephone? I said, I'll tell you in a few minutes when they finish giving me all kinds of hell. I said, by the way, tell me about your numbers. And they said, well, we have whatever number of Republicans, 36 Republicans, and 5 of us. I said, nah, you may have 35 Republicans. Why, do you have another hidden Republican? I said, no, one died a few minutes ago.
He obviously wasn't one of your 5, right?
No, hell no.
I'm running out of time, and I want to make sure I leave time for all of you to do questions and answers, but I want to get about three more in here if we can. Can you talk a little bit about the decision to run for mayor and what accomplishments that you're most proud of as mayor?
As I said, what Republicans succeeded in doing was getting the signatures for term limits. And when they put term limits on the ballot, and we lost the fight with the voters for term limits, it became clear that in 6 years, I would be out of politics. There was no place for me to go. I had friends in Congress and friends in other offices. However, when we did the polling, it was determined that the incumbent mayor was not very strong, that I could actually beat him. And so our operation decided to take on the incumbent mayor, a fellow named Frank Jordan, a fellow Democrat, former police chief. And we beat Mr. Jordan, but it was term limits that prompted my race for mayor. I would not have ever been a candidate for local government. I just didn't have anything going with it. Not interested in local government. As a matter of fact, I'd spent a little time trying to abolish local government. I tried to consolidate all those kinds of things because I thought the legislature was where the action really was, and we were the great people. And lo and behold, I had to run for mayor, and I won.
Did you ever consider running for federal office? For
Never.
Congress or
No,
Senate?
I only wanted to be speaker. That's the only thing I ever wanted to be. I remember saying once, arrogantly, when somebody asked me in 1988, 89, who do you think will replace you for speaker? I said, I'm not sure, but I got to believe that he or she is being conceived tonight. That's how long I wanted to be speaker. So I had no ambition to go any other place. And I'm sorry, however, that I didn't realize how great the mayor's job was. But after my friend Moscone, and he was my best friend, was assassinated, I got turned off permanently on local government. And finally, when I had nothing else, no other place, no other option, I ran for mayor and discovered that I should have been mayor all my life. The mayor's job, that's like being the king. That is a great job. You have your own army, your own police department. You know, you have your own health department to harass people that don't give you good seats in restaurants. You really have a great. You can give people jobs. You can actually do wonderful things. And that's what I did for the city. I really did great things for the city. I literally took that city, which was almost dormant in terms of its development, in terms of its growth, in terms of its inclusion, including people of color in its delivery system, and newcomers in the delivery system. I changed all of that, literally, exercising all the power of the mayor's office. And the progressives, who have always had problems with me, did everything they could to try to stop me from being able to do that. Now, with all the troubles they're having, they're all lobbying me to come back to be mayor. But you never appreciate it until after you're dead.
Well, you may get more questions on contemporary politics from our audience, but I did want to ask you one tonight. If the president called you up tonight here in Kansas City when we get you back to your hotel to catch your early flight tomorrow and said, Mr. Mayor, what's the best advice you could give me right now, what would you tell him?
I would tell him that his meeting with the Republicans at their private operation that was telecast on CNN and many of the other stations was singularly the best thing, in my opinion, that he's done in the last year. It elevated him to the level of his intellect, it elevated him to the level of his skills, and it literally reduced his competition to where, had I been presiding as a Republican, I would have been very polite, said hello to the president, and then escorted him out. I never would have allowed for an hour of television and with my B team people asking him questions, because he absolutely destroyed them. And he now has the upper hand. The business of setting the summit for the 25th, and I would tell him he should keep doing that. Stay out of Indiana where nobody, people are unemployed. Go challenge your critics. And to the extent that you demonstrate your skill and your ability, you literally reduce the level of hostility that's been generated in Virginia, in New Jersey, and in Massachusetts based on misrepresentations about who you are. The more you expose yourself, Mr. President, the better off you're going to be. But expose yourself not on the Sunday morning talk shows, but in the situation in which you can confront your demons, you can confront your enemies, and you can show that they are vacant in terms of their programs and their policies, and that they are half-witted in some cases on things that that you're advocating. For an example, one of the great things that he's stumbled on and put there, not by anything he did, the dramatic increase in the rates of your coverage if you're with Blue Cross in California, 39% increase in your premium. Alarms everybody. You don't have to be a Tea Party member, Republican, Democrat to know that there's something wrong with that. He jumped in and said, henceforth, we're going to have controls. We're going to regulate the rates of increase. Everybody can understand that. And if he grabs a few more of those, and that's what I would tell him, you grab a few more of those and keep doing it. Don't get yourself locked in to trying to persuade Ben Nelson from that little state that he's from, or that woman from Louisiana or wherever she's from. The process says 50 plus 1, and you ought to put together a package of 50 plus 1 with wherever you can find them. And apparently, he's headed in that direction. The 5 Republicans who said, the hell with the Republican leadership, we're going for the jobs bill, there are at least 5 more who will go for some form of health. And I would tell him, break it down. Start with the business of saying, you can't turn me down for pre-existing condition. Every Republican damn near will have to vote for that. Go for the insurance control. Most Democrats and many Republicans will have to vote for that. Go for portability of your health care plan and do them individually, one at a time. Start stacking them up. Start stacking them up, and pretty soon you will reduce your opposition to a mere piddling on things they object to. And those things they object to, don't mention them.
Very good political advice. One final question for you. You've established the Willie L. Brown Institute on Politics and Public Service, and you have a mission very similar to the Dole Institute's mission. And we have a number of young people here tonight. What would you tell the young people here about the importance of being involved in their community, in public service, and in politics?
I don't think there's any finer calling than that which I initially had the opportunity to so do. I think if you get the chance to really do public service on the electoral side or on the staff side, you really are doing the Lord's work. You really can see the results of your contribution, of your skill, of your commitment, and your ability. And so when I started my institute following my mayor's, I was highly motivated to do it because when I took over as mayor in '96, I was totally without any staff component. There were so few people at the local level that had the skills that I had been accustomed to. I'd been accustomed to White House fellows. I'd been accustomed to people who were interns on the honor side of the operation up there, well-trained, interested in doing public service. I'd been accustomed to people who were really quality staff, like Representative Davis's father, who had been a part of the legislative process. At the local level, no such individuals existed. And so I set about to see if I couldn't use whatever equity I had with the public, and particularly at the university level, to recruit people and bring in people like Chuck Schwab and others to be the gurus on a almost like a fellow operation to help train these people and inspire them. I also, as a component, I'm prepared to give advice and counsel and pull together people like George Shultz and others to help sit-in politicians work through their problems. And so in that regard, it's all designed so that at some point, the highest and the brightest and the best will be those who want to do public service.
Very good. Good luck in that. Let's go to Q&A now. If you will wait for a cordless mic, we have one up here already. Margarita and Stephanie will be bringing those around. Please ask one question.
I'm just curious. Currently, California has their first African-American female Speaker of the House, and I'm assuming that that's a result of your legacy, but I was wondering, were you a mentor to her? I'm just curious.
More than a mentor to her.
I figured you were.
I actually talked her into running for Speaker. She didn't want to run. She's a social worker by trade and did not have any of the skill set that you look for. You know, there's no treachery about her, no, nothing like that. She's really too decent. But I convinced her that even decency can work in the speaker's job. And she has demonstrated that. She's out as of Monday. She's out as of Monday, because now the speakership is no longer what it was when I served as speaker. The speakership is a 15-month maximum opportunity, and a gay guy, John Perez, will be sworn in on March 1st as her successor. She is a candidate for Congress. Diane Watson has decided to leave the Congress, and Karen Bass is going to win that and probably have a long, distinguished career as a member of the Congress, and which is good because she's now reasonably well trained. There have been 10 speakers since I left the speakership. In 15 years, there was only one. In the next 15 years, 10. That's how insignificant the job has become.
Okay. I'd encourage students to ask questions. We'll try to give preference to students, but I don't see any student hands. Anybody else? Okay. Good.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to know just a historical question. You came to the speakership in 1980 just as President Reagan was coming, serving his, beginning his to serve his first term in office. The president had difficulties with cities, or in my opinion, he had difficulties with cities, looking over the record. And I want to know, what was your relationship with President Reagan, a Californian, former governor, when you were in the House? What was your relationship like with Mr. Reagan?
Following President Reagan's tenure as president, the first time he ever returned to the state capitol was at my invitation. He had no relationship really with Pete Wilson and the Republicans. He did have, however, a relationship with me, because when he served as governor, I served as chair of the Ways and Means Committee. And constitutionally, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee or the chair of the Senate Finance Committee was carried the governor's budget. So I was the author of Ronald Reagan's budgets, and I came to know him very well. He was a guy who built relationships personally by inviting you home to dinner. He'd have the leadership over the dinner with some regularity. And he had a great set of Lionel trains in his basement. And I'm a train nut, total and complete train nut. And as dinner would unfold, Reagan and Brown would disappear. And Nancy would keep entertaining, and we go play trains. And we developed a relationship around trains and a trust around trains. The first visit for me ever to the White House was at Reagan's invitation when he became the president. You wouldn't believe that, but that's one of the great photographs that I have. And Reagan wrote a letter to me that one of my colleagues who was supposed to move the letter in the race, in the contest on term limits, he wrote a letter to me saying, you can tell the voters that as president, I think I'd still be president if they didn't have term limits, and that I'm voting no on term limits. Well, my guy, David Roberti, who had the job of getting it out, didn't warn us that he wasn't doing it until Sunday before the election on Tuesday. And so the relationship with Ronald Reagan was a good one. We got out of Ronald Reagan a signature on pro-choice. He signed the bill, a Bielesen bill, that allowed for abortions in the state of California back in the early 70s when that just didn't happen. He signed the bill that mandated cost of living increases for welfare recipients, all because we walked him through the reality of trying to live on the meager amount that came without some automatic increase. And so he made it so that the cost of living increase would be visited without a vote in every in every election. And so Reagan was a practical person by every sense of the word, and a gentleman above all else, and ultimately a colleague.
Okay, other questions?
And we both had the same view about cities, by the way. I think I told you at the outset that I didn't think they ought to exist when I served in the legislature.
Chris?
Thank you for coming. I wanted to garner your barometer for the 2010 election. What do you think Democrats need to do to continue in power and stay successful for the 2010 election cycle?
Democrats have not been very smart in 2009. They better be smarter in 2010. They've let the Republicans run a ring around them, and because somehow they didn't understand staying on message. They didn't understand how the public is far more impressed with results than they are with dialogue. For an example, if Obama had introduced his current health proposal March of 2009 with a mandate to vote on it 15 minutes after he introduced it, he would not be in trouble, and nor would the Democrats be in trouble. So they need to, in 2010, really free themselves of the nonsense that plagued them in 2009. They need to get back to understanding that they no longer have Bush to bash. They won in many cases because they bashed an unpopular president in 2 unpopular wars. Well, the first thing you should have done was stop those goddamn wars. And you wouldn't have that burden today. And they didn't do that, though. They decided to be responsible or try to be responsible, and they've been kicked around very badly. For 2010, if I'm one of those Democrats in one of those marginal districts, I'd be so far away from Nancy Pelosi that she'd have to use foreign call letters to find me. Period. And I think Democrats better do that.
Other questions? Sure, we have some folks here who want to ask questions. Okay, Ed in the back.
In our recent history, California's provided us with 2 presidents, Nixon and Reagan, and we've had other candidates from there. I think Earl Warren, Jerry Brown. Do you think California will ever...
and Alan Cranston.
And do you think California will ever produce another president?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's going to be somebody that comes out. I got to tell you that without the limitations of place of birth, Schwarzenegger would have been a Republican nominee last time around. He was the most attractive, the most pliable. And the Republicans are getting really smart. They've decided they can't run and win with people who are, who have consumed the Kool-Aid. They want them to consume the Kool-Aid, but not let anybody know they drink it. And Scott Brown is the first example of that. Chris out of New Jersey is in the same category. McDowell in Virginia is there. And if they are smart enough to move around and find themselves another Arnold Schwarzenegger, they'll do all right. California will do all right, even without Schwarzenegger, because the Democrats, likewise, are going to come up with a viable candidate. We're getting old out there as a party for personalities. We got Jerry Brown running for governor, and he's going to win, but he's 73. He's going nowhere after that. But we got him. We got Dianne Feinstein, U.S. Senator, chair of the Intelligence Committee, 76. We got Barbara Boxer, the chair of, I think it's like Public Works or something, and she's in her late 60s. And we got Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House. She's in her late 60s. So we're really burdened with a lot of vintage Jurassic Park dwellers as our team. We really got, and I'm urging them to move away and move to the Gavin Newsoms, move to the people who have 20 years left on their participatory cycle, not people who are beyond their cycle already. If they do that, by the time Barack Obama leaves, we may very well have a California candidate for the president or the vice president who is a Democrat.
You touched briefly on Chris's question about the future of the Democratic Party. I'm just curious what you think the future of the Republican Party is going to be, given the Tea Party movement and sort of this rift a lot of us are seeing in the conservatives and sort of the moderate Republicans. And I was curious what you think that's going to end up looking like here in the next couple of years, if not, 10-year outset.
Well, I think third-party movements in this country have proven to be ultimately inept. There's a vast number of people who consider themselves independents, but they're also not part of any particular party, and they certainly aren't going to hook up and become a part of the Tea Party, etc. At the moment, the Republicans are doing a good job of letting the Tea Party front for them and with them for purposes of stopping Democrats or helping to elect Republicans who can't get elected otherwise. But you're beginning to see signs of where that's not going to work. In the state of Nevada, for an example, everybody assumed Harry Reid was toast. The poll that you'll see published in a couple of days shows that Harry Reid is about 5 points below the Republicans. But there's a Tea Party person in that same race with 12 or 14% of the votes. And so the Republicans are going to have to now try to figure out how to get rid of this Tea Party potential without offending the Tea Party adherents. You probably can't do that. The Republicans tried that when Ross Perot elected Bill Clinton back in 1992. He hoped to defeat the then sitting president, and Bill Clinton won without a majority of the votes. The same thing, I think, is going to happen in the Tea Party. Is not going to become the private preserve of the independents. Independents won't let the Tea Party become their private preserve. The Tea Party people, however, are literally disgruntled ex-Republicans and ex-conservatives trying to find a new way to package themselves and not doing a very good job at concealing what they're doing. And so I think going forward, the Democrats has got to encourage the Tea Party.
Okay, Stephanie, we'll go back here.
In the spirit of Black History Month, do you have any thoughts on the fact that President Obama, whose mother is obviously of Caucasian heritage and his father obviously of African heritage, being called a black man without any thought being given to his makeup, his DNA, as a statement of fact about how America still holds fast, seemingly to me anyway, to the one-drop rule?
Well, I don't think America probably will ever get rid of the one-drop rule, period. And I'm not sure it's necessary for us to progress. Barack Obama won the presidency in spectacular fashion. He raised more money for a presidential candidacy than anyone else in the history of this country by light years. More importantly, he created a new level of contributors who had never ever bothered to do anything about buying in on behalf of any politician. The lady who works in the building that I'm in didn't tell me until about the 4th or 5th month. Now, this is a woman who's just above minimum wages. She finally was so proud of what she was doing, and she's Filipino. She's so proud of what she's doing, she had to tell somebody, and she told me she and her family had been sending Barack Obama $25 a month for the last several months. They can't afford that, but they were doing that, and a whole host of other people were doing the same thing. Those are the people whom he generated a considerable amount of hope for. And believe me, that's of great benefit to the African American community generally, because many of those people didn't debate whether or not his mother was a white woman from Kansas and his father was a person of African descent. They saw him no differently than they see other black folk, and they were proud of the fact that they were finally doing something with and for somebody his color. I think he recognizes that he's the beneficiary of that as well, and it's also, I suspect for him, an obligation, not having been, let's say, raised in Memphis. He has some challenges to respond to that obligation, and in some cases he's been criticized by people who were raised in Memphis because I don't think he's rising to the level of their expectations. I think he's playing it, though, the way that that little old lady in the hallway who sent him the $25 would want him to play on that side of the race issue, period. And I think going forward, he will continue to do so. The fact that his wife is clearly black and is heading components of his operation that are virtually non-political. They don't generate any real partisan response. Fighting obesity is not something that people do because they're Republican, Democrats, or Tea Party folk. And I think that's a good thing because she really is the symbol of blackness in every way. There's no missing her on the gene side. And so I think that the one drop issue is frankly not really an issue.
We had a question right here. We're going to do like one more. I think we have one back there.
You mentioned the deregulation of energy in California earlier, and I know that played in a lot with the Enron corruption and scandal, and I was just kind of curious if maybe you could give some of the political tactics and things that were used in getting that through, as well as maybe Enron lobbying for it. Give us some background on it.
I don't think Enron lobbied for it. Well, I have no evidence that Enron lobbied for it. But, you know, deregulation had become the word in America in the late 80s and the 90s. Everybody was talking about deregulating everything. Deregulating the airlines, or we actually, in the Clinton administration, deregulated the financial institutions, which contributed substantially to the ultimate need for the bailout, because we allowed financial institutions no longer to be capped for leverage purposes. For an example, we allowed them to do, unlike Canada, which has it at about 18%, 18 to 1, we allow 70 to 1 if you want to do it. Before that, we didn't do that. Well, we deregulated everything, thinking that that was a way to get better competition, that was a way to get a lot more Walmarts built, that was a way to get a lot more discounts because the competition would be driven by a desire for market share. In the world of energy, that's exactly what the people who were doing it in the state of California thought. They didn't even understand the energy delivery system. Had they understood it, they probably would have provided some means by which to not allow for such wide swings in the pricing process and in the delivery date process. But they did, and they did it legislatively in the time that Mr. Wilson was still the governor, and then ultimately when my friend Gray Davis was the governor, and it resulted in a horror. Our Attorney General, Bill Lockyer, I think was probably the first to spot the Enrons of the world as being people who were exploiting the hell out of the deregulation process by engaging in massive price fixing. And he went after Enron early on and eventually led to, I think, the downfall of Enron and led to a changed attitude about deregulation. More than anything else, however, it was not the challenge that came from any politician being critical. It was the business of the energy companies themselves withholding supply that resulted in a reduced amount of energy available in very critical times of need. And that, more than anything else, prompted the revolt that backed them out of the deregulatory process.
We have time for one more question. Stephanie over here.
Hi. I lived in California for 20 years, and I'm really grateful for your service there, and I'm grateful for your appearance here that we can get to ask you questions and hear your stories. Appreciating the stories that you're telling today and seeing the aspect of strategy that you had. I'm afraid to irritate you with this question and afraid to mention this name one more time, but I'm very curious. Do you think Sarah Palin will do herself in, or does there need to be a strategy based on her great public appeal?
Well, I got to tell you that I probably was one of the few people in the country who said Sarah Palin was right to leave the governorship of Alaska. I said that her talent for openers was not in being governor. She demonstrated that every day. And that she would be better off if she really ultimately wanted to do something significant, coming, I suppose, south from where she lived, and literally becoming a full participant in the delivery system to see whether or not she has the skills and the ability beyond being an attractive speech maker. So far, she's still just being an attractive speech maker. I'm angry with her because she wrote a book and made $12 million, and I wrote a book. She gets $100,000 for a speech, and I get nothing except dinner. I do think she has a future, though, but she is going to have to really immerse herself in a knowledge pursuit that is not evident as part of her arsenal today. If she doesn't, you can't stay in this business and be empty. At some point, you really do have to go through and offer some cogent and clear suggestions and recommendations for a solution to problems. Right now, she's still on the crooked speech circuit, using homilies and other kinds of things that entertains people but doesn't inform them. That is not a sustainable agenda for someone who wishes to run for higher office.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a terrific evening.
Thank you.